In the early days of December 2025, the region of Lumajang Regency in East Java, Indonesia, entered a moment of fear that would etch itself deeply into the memory of everyone living near the great volcano Semeru. In the district of Candipuro, particularly in the small hamlet of Dusun Sumber Langsep in Desa Jugosari, the first signs of danger appeared quietly, almost deceptively. From far away, faint rumbles echoed from the summit of Semeru, a mountain that had long been both protector and threat. Clouds hovered low over the slopes, the sky heavy with the type of rain that signals the beginning of the monsoon season. The warnings from the geological monitoring agencies had already circulated days earlier. Semeru had been active since late November, sending plumes of ash into the sky and releasing lava avalanches down the steep ravines that carved into its southern side. On December 5, 2025, early morning instruments detected increasing tremors. Volcanic material had accumulated along several drainage channels, especially those feeding the Besuk Kobokan Valley. With such conditions, even moderate rain could trigger Lahars, fast-moving floods of volcanic debris, ash, sand, and water capable of overwhelming anything in their path. As rain began to intensify on December 5th, the soil on the upper slopes trembled and shifted. Water flowed into the channels, mixing with fresh volcanic material. Within minutes, a thick slurry formed, deep gray and steaming with trapped heat from the mountain's recent activity. By the afternoon, the channels carrying runoff from Semeru were no longer simple waterways. They became churning rivers of mud, ash, and volcanic sand, heavy, forceful, and unpredictable. Monitoring posts reported the increase, but the true magnitude of the flow became clear only when the flood reached lower villages. The residents of Sumber Langsep heard it before they saw it, a sound like thunder, but continuous. A low, roaring vibration traveling through the ground. Those living closest to the riverbanks were the first to witness the water rising unnaturally fast. The usually shallow river had transformed into a violent tide, climbing over its banks and carrying logs, stones, and chunks of volcanic rock. People who stood on rooftops to observe the phenomenon shouted warnings to neighbors, urging them to climb to higher ground. By the evening of December 5th, the Lahar had carved its way toward the settlement. Several homes near the river were partially submerged, their walls stained dark with mud and volcanic silt. Eyewitnesses described the suffocating smell, sulfur mixed with wet earth, the air thick with fine ash that irritated the throat and eyes. Families grabbed what they could: documents, clothing, food, and in many cases only their children. Livestock bellowed in panic as the rising mud trapped fences and posts. In the chaos, some tried to free their animals, cutting ropes or breaking wooden pens, while others focused solely on escaping. Throughout the night, emergency teams attempted to reach the isolated hamlet, but road access was quickly cut off. Bridges along the Besuk Kobokan corridor were buried or structurally compromised, making them too dangerous to cross. Messages from local authorities emphasized the scale of the destruction. At least 137 households were isolated on higher ground, their access to food, clean water, and electricity severely limited. Reports came in that approximately 9 houses and 1 small shop had been inundated, but residents feared the numbers would rise with the continuing rain. On December 6th, heavy rainfall continued, and with it came secondary eruptions. Ash plumes rose from Semeru's crater, and seismic stations detected tremor episodes considered typical precursors of new pyroclastic material descending the slope. Though not a full explosion like past major eruptions, the combination of rainfall and the volcano's instability generated powerful collapse. These secondary flows intensified the destruction in Sumber Langsep, pushing deeper into the hamlet and approaching structures previously thought safe. Witnesses recorded videos showing the mosque of Sumber Langsep partially filled with mud, its floors covered in thick gray sediment. Prayer mats floated in the slurry, toppled furniture lay half buried, and the once bright interior lights flickered as electrical lines short-circuited. Outside, the sound of rushing debris continued, while ash from minor eruptions settled over rooftops, coating everything in a uniform, ghostly layer. As the morning progressed, a dense mist of volcanic gas and steam hovered over the valley. Visibility dropped so low that residents could not see beyond a few meters. Calls echoed through the fog, instructions to evacuate, cries for help, reassurances offered to children. More than once, people shouted to warn others not to cross the flooded areas. The latter was deceptive, appearing slow and thick, but exerting immense force beneath the surface. Even a few steps into it could trap someone knee-deep, making escape nearly impossible without assistance. By midday on December 6th, as the storm eased briefly, the scale of the damage became clear. The main river channel had widened dramatically, dragging entire sections of riverbank into its current. Farmland that had once been green with rice and vegetables was now a uniform layer of volcanic sludge. Coconut trees leaned at unnatural angles, their roots exposed. Roads that villagers used daily to reach markets or schools had disappeared under the weight of mud and stone. Relief teams finally managed to approach the area from elevated routes. They brought water, blankets, and basic medical supplies. Families huddled together under makeshift tarpaulins, coughing from ash exposure, some nursing cuts or bruises sustained during the escape. Many wondered aloud how long they would need to wait before returning to their homes to assess the full damage. Others feared that the worst was not yet over, especially with Semeru still showing signs of unrest. The night of December 6th brought fresh terror. Rain began again, heavier than before. Authorities issued new warnings, urging all residents near the southern slopes to move even further uphill. In Sumber Langsep, those who had returned briefly to salvage belongings were forced to flee once more. Lahar sirens echoed across the valley, and the sound of the river grew louder, deeper, resonating like a continuous drumbeat. People scrambled along slippery footpaths, guided only by the faint glow of flashlights and distant shouts. Every minute counted. Every hesitation risked entrapment. The lahars during this second wave were thicker, darker, and more violent. They carried entire tree trunks, broken sections of bridges, and pieces of rooftops torn from earlier damage. The floodwaters entered homes that had previously survived, lifting furniture and smashing it against walls. Doors buckled under pressure, windows shattered from the force of debris. The community's sense of safety, already fragile, evaporated completely. Morning on December 7th revealed a transformed landscape. In some areas, the lahar deposits were more than a meter deep. Cars stood half-buried, their windows filled with mud. Livestock that had not escaped lay trapped or missing. For many families, the only possessions left untouched were those carried during evacuation. Local authorities declared the area unsafe for return. They warned that with the rainy season far from over, additional lahars were likely, and the weakened riverbanks could collapse again at any time. For residents of Sumber Langsep, the days that followed blurred together. Stranded on high ground, they waited for updates while volunteers distributed aid. Children cried from hunger or fear. Parents tried to reassure them despite not knowing when, or if, they would ever return home. Rumors circulated of neighboring hamlets facing similar destruction. Some spoke of the sound of a distant explosion overnight, possibly another rockfall or a minor crater event. Others claimed to have seen flashes of light from the summit, though it was impossible to confirm through the haze. In the absence of certainty, stories grew. Older villagers recounted past eruptions of Semeru, remembering the destruction of earlier decades. Some recalled the deadly eruption of 2021, comparing it to the current chaos. Younger residents listened in silence, realizing for the first time that living in the shadow of a volcano meant accepting a lifetime of risk. Days later, when the rain finally eased, teams began clearing access routes. Bulldozers pushed aside layers of mud and rock. Volunteers shoveled debris by hand, struggling to free what remained of buried pathways. Each meter gained felt like a small victory. Slowly, cautiously, authorities allowed small groups to return to inspect their homes. Many found nothing but ruins. Wooden walls had collapsed, floors were covered in thick sediment, and belongings were either destroyed or carried away by the flood. In some cases, residents discovered objects half-buried: photographs, school books, religious items. These finds sparked tears, reminders of the life they once had. Others faced the painful realization that rebuilding would take months, perhaps years, and that they might need to relocate permanently. The land where their ancestors had lived for generations had become unpredictable, dangerous, and scarred by nature's force. As cleanup operations continued, experts arrived to study the lahar deposits. They explained that the flows had been unusually large for early December, influenced by both intense rainfall and the accumulation of fresh volcanic material on the slopes. Semeru's activity cycle made these events more likely, particularly during the monsoon season. The steep topography around the volcano accelerated the descent of mud flows, giving residents little time to react. The scientists emphasized that lahars would remain a threat for months, even if the volcano entered a quieter phase. The river channels were clogged with debris, forming temporary dams that could burst with the next heavy rain. Residents were urged to stay away from valleys, river crossings, and low-lying areas. Authorities planned to reinforce evacuation routes and build additional monitoring stations, but the sheer force of the recent flows showed that no amount of preparation could fully eliminate the danger. Meanwhile, in the high-ground shelters, life settled into a fragile routine. Volunteers distributed warm meals. Medical workers treated respiratory irritation caused by ash. Children played with improvised toys while adults discussed the next steps. Some debated rebuilding homes on elevated slopes. Others considered moving to entirely new regions. Weddings, community events, and religious gatherings, once common and joyful, were postponed indefinitely. Night after night, the distant silhouette of Semeru loomed over the camps. Occasionally, a faint red glow appeared near the summit, indicating lava movement or small eruptions. Each time it happened, conversations fell silent. People watched, remembering the nights when the glow had been followed by the roar of lahars racing toward their homes. Weeks later, the first temporary housing units arrived, constructed from lightweight materials and designed for quick assembly. Families moved into these shelters with mixed emotions, grateful for safety, yet mourning the loss of their former homes. Clean water tanks were installed, and solar panels provided limited electricity. The community began planning how to rebuild schools and public spaces, knowing that recovery would be long and challenging. In time, the roads were cleared enough for emergency vehicles to pass regularly. Markets reopened in makeshift tents. Small stalls sold food and basic goods. Life, though altered, found a way to continue. Yet the scars of December 2025 remain visible everywhere on the land, on the structures, and most of all, in the memories of the people who lived through it. The story of Dusun Sumber Langsep in those early days of December is not one of a single catastrophic eruption, but rather a complex, terrifying convergence of volcanic activity and seasonal rain.